Hello.
Hello. It's truly an honor to have you here with us today on AstroTeach.
I'm Alyssa Carson. I am an astrobiologist and I'm currently a PhD student working on my PhD in space and planetary science. I'm also an aspiring astronaut, have always been fascinated with space and the idea of being able to apply and be involved in the space industry like that one day. My interests really came from a little spark that I had when I was a little girl. No one in my family had any background in space or science or anything similar, but I kind of had a little interest in space and started asking all these questions. Looking back, the best guess me and my dad have is maybe it was a cartoon that I was watching because we had a poster for a cartoon that said Mission to Mars on it. And so really that's the only place we can even think of where I heard about space to begin with. And so from that initial fascination, I was just drawn to want to be able to learn more about space. And I think the more that I learned, the more interested I became. So it just continued to grow into a really big dream.
We know you attended your first space camp at just 7 years old.
Yeah, the first space camp that I went to was honestly just such a blast. I was driving home with like my grandmother and some other family members, and we drove past the billboard for space camp, and so we ended up stopping. And I brought like a brochure home to my dad, and I was like begging my dad for us to be able to go. And so once we were finally able to go, it was just a lot of fun. I had been asking so many questions about space, and I was asking so many questions to my dad, and he just didn't really have all the answers because he didn't know all that much about space. But going to space camp, it was all of a sudden I had all this information, and I was able to ride simulators and learn all this space history that I was kind of curious about. And it really just kind of opened the door to so many more things just because I was finally taught so much information that I just didn't really know before. And one of the great things that Space Camp did was typically whenever you would be there at the camp, they would try to have an astronaut there at the end of the week that maybe you could go listen to. And so being able to hear from astronauts was obviously very inspiring. Being able to also hear from other female astronauts was really cool to be able to like hear their stories and see how they got to the position that they did. Yeah, for me, I ended up in astrobiology. At first, I didn't really know many of my options of what I could even pursue as a career going into something space related. I luckily met this lovely astrobiologist. She worked at NASA at the time, and she heard about my interest in astrophysics and wanted to tell me a little bit about astrobiology, and that completely shifted my entire mindset and idea of what I wanted to do. And so astrobiology was just the perfect balance between the different sciences. It wasn't necessarily too heavy on one, and it also some of the ideas of possible habitable regions and other areas of our solar system or even outside of our solar system I thought was so fascinating, and really leaned into some of the areas of interest that I really had within space, and now specifically with research. I mean, for some of the citizen science that we did, we would work with like a spacesuit company, and we would kind of test some of the different elements of their spacesuits. And so being able to learn a little bit into that side of things and seeing how that works, or, no matter what it was almost like getting, such in-depth knowledge about a certain area that was totally new. And so I think that they were always really fascinating. And I always enjoyed that they were like building towards something, towards a paper, towards better development of the suits, or whatever it might have been. It always kind of was building towards something. And so that was something that I always loved about the space industry. I thought it was people contributing to really build something greater. And so I think that that's what I wanted to feel a part of. once I kind of landed on astrobiology, I was kind of thinking, okay, what other skills do astronauts need? And I started trying to figure that out and look for those types of opportunities. I think for me, one thing was looking at the different environments on Earth that are decently similar to space. So I did like scuba diving, when you're fully submerged underwater. That's kind of the closest we can get to like long term, not quite microgravity, but reduced gravity in a way. We learned and kind of took the suits through testing, but we would basically have to escape from a capsule wearing the spacesuits. We saw if you could like inflate a life raft while wearing them. Could you get yourself into a life raft? Could you do it as a team? And a lot of those were very physically demanding because obviously, ideally, if you have a team of you, everything's a little bit easier because you can kind of work with one another. But essentially, at the end of the day, just in case, you always want to make sure that if an astronaut was in that situation, you would also be able to do it by yourself. So being able to try to demonstrate that and do things completely by yourself, especially in the water and with a spacesuit. So a lot of those physical challenges have definitely been there, and just testing different things. I think from the mental side of things, I think I've always had kind of an appreciation for the way astronauts are able to kind of separate themselves and be away from friends and family for a period of time. I think that it's definitely one of the more challenging aspects of being able to do missions or go to space at all.
How does your current research in astrobiology connect to future Mars explorations?
Yeah, right now all of my research technically revolves around Mars. Essentially, what I look into is potential past life or maybe current, but life that could possibly be on Mars and seeing how possible that is. Kind of the biggest questions that we have around Mars. We know that Mars used to be a little bit more habitable than it is today. And so with that in question, and we also think there used to be a little bit more water on Mars. And so with some of those things that we're interested in, that kind of also starts to beg the question if there was ever any kind of life on Mars, or how that could have played into things. So yeah, we work with a type of archaea, and we do different experiments to essentially see if they're able to interact with the Martian surface. Kind of my area of research wants to maybe see what this possibility is before we start necessarily maybe mixing different bacteria, especially once humans go to Mars. It may be hard to distinguish, did we find something that's potential life on Mars, or did we just find something that was on our own skin? It can kind of get a little confusing once we kind of progress and have more things going to Mars. I learned so much about the Apollo days, and when people were going to the moon, and there was such like a unifying hoorah over, being able to send people to the moon. And, so many people, whether they had any knowledge about space or not, were kind of drawn in to learning more about space. I think that was such a special period of time, and something that I feel like I've always wanted to experience, of, wanting to see just everyone, whether they have any interest in space or not, but just have this little like curiosity of like, wait, what's going on? That's so crazy that someone was able to go to the moon. Or and I think that was a bit of that generation. And I think once we get to the point of sending people back to the moon and sending people to Mars, I think we'll kind of see that again, a little bit of that like spark and interest in space.
As you mentioned, your journey is unique, not as a NASA selected astronaut yet, but as someone building the skill for future opportunities.
I think one of the biggest things that I hope people see is to never let anyone take your dream away from you. If you're really interested in something, then go for it. No matter what other people may say. I know that, when I was younger, saying I want to be an astronaut and work in the space industry, all those were very crazy aspirations, and maybe didn't necessarily seem very possible to many people. But I think that, I knew what I was interested in, and I kept working towards it. So as long as you know what you want to do, that's all that matters. Yeah, I think that my hope would be, if I was chosen for something like that, we'd be able to get something valuable out of it. I think that it's important to want to gain some really valuable science, something, especially from my side. I mean, it would be going in from more of a science research perspective. And so I'd want to be able to get some large science objectives accomplished on a mission. And so I think that would be my greatest hope, is that we could really get a lot done in a kind of short period of time, that humans would kind of be over there. And so I think that that time would be utilized to really hit all of those objectives. I know that one of the biggest challenges was when I got my skydiving license. I was beyond terrified, and so scared. I had done some tandem skydives, which I really didn't have too much fear of doing tandem skydives. I mean, in my head, I'm like, I have a professional attached to me, like, I'm not necessarily in charge. But once I started working towards my license, where you start jumping by yourself, it was a whole new playing field. And so, actually, my first jump when I was by myself, she ended up pulling me out of the airplane because I was so scared. I kept kind of backing out. So we would go you would go up on your tiptoes and then down to kind of motion that you were about to jump, and then you would jump out. And so I would always go up on my tiptoes, down, and then I'd crawl back into the airplane. And so we took so long that we had to do another fly around, because I had done that like 7 times. And so when we went to do our fly around, she looked at me and was like, do you want to jump, or do you want to just go land? And I was like, no, I'm already up here, I might as well. So I told her that I wanted to. And so the next time we went around, she wasn't wasting more of this poor pilot's time. So when I went up, I went to go crawl back in, but instead she pulled me out. And she said that she only did that because I told her I for sure wanted to jump. And so I think that was kind of getting through that mental barrier. So much of the time, we can have just that safety alarm go off in our heads and kind of keep us from different things. And so, we ended up jumping, and she was shaking me to get me to relax. She was like, relax, relax. There's nothing to do now, but just experience it.